Everyone in my family laughed when they saw the birthday gift I had brought, a rough black stone fit only for propping up a crooked table. Then they turned around and fawned over the adopted daughter's so-called imperial dragon pearl. I said nothing. I simply stepped forward, raised my ugly stone, and shattered that precious dragon pearl before the entire hall. Just when everyone thought I had doomed myself, rancid wax spilled from the broken pearl, and the worthless stone in my hand began to glow with a light that would soon set the whole capital astir. Hey everyone, it is Xiao Yu. Today's story begins in a world of glittering treasures, hidden lies, and people who are not always what they seem. So let's begin. The carriage rocked along the road as I huddled in a corner, wrapped in a plain cloak faded pale from years of washing. Beneath me lay cushions of cloud brocade. My hands rested neatly in my lap, my fingertips looking nervous to any watching eye. In truth, I was slowly tracing the grain of the carriage wood. Second young lady, once we reached the Marquise's residence, you had best put away these rustic manners. Nanny Liu, seated opposite me, lifted her eyelids. Her cloudy eyes held naked contempt. Remember who you are. You are the Marquis of Jang Wan's second legitimate daughter, lost during the wars years ago and only now recovered. Do not shame his lordship or her ladyship. I shrank my neck timidly and answered in a voice scarcely louder than a gnat's. Yes, I understand. The truth was, I feared neither strangers nor the high walls of a noble estate. I merely disliked noise. For as long as I could remember, whenever my fingertips touched an object, even an ordinary brick, I could feel the weight of its years and whether it was true or false. And the capital, steeped in wealth and splendor, was crowded with counterfeits. Their dead, hollow aura clamored against my senses until my head ached. When I crossed beneath the vermilion gates of the Marquis of Jang Wan's residence, I deliberately caught my foot on the high threshold. The servants on either side covered their mouths to laugh. Nanny Liu shot me a look of disgust. I lowered my head, hiding the faint curve at the corner of my lips. After winding through corridor upon corridor, I was brought into the hall of peaceful longevity where sandalwood incense curled through the air. It was the Dowager Lady's 60th birthday, and the hall glittered with jewels and silk. Nearly every noblewoman of consequence in the capital had come. And in the place of greatest honor to the left of the main seat sat Xiao Heng, heir to the Prince of the Northern Marches, dressed in a black python robe. So, this is the second girl you found outside the family. The Dowager Lady sat at the head of the hall, silver-haired and sharp-eyed. Her gaze swept over my worn cloak, and whatever warmth had been in her expression vanished at once. My birth mother, the Marchioness, was dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. How much of those tears came from heartache, and how much from distaste I could tell at a glance. Wanner, come, meet your sister. Mother drew forward the delicate young woman beside her. Her name was Zhang Yufu. After I went missing, Mother had adopted her to soothe the grief of losing a daughter. Now Yufu wore shimmering brocade worth a fortune by the bolt, a gold filigree coronet studded with gems, and at its center a sea-calming pearl as large as the tip of a thumb. She looked every inch the true-born jewel of the Marquise's house. Elder sister, you have suffered so much. Zhang Yufu stepped forward and clasped my hand with practiced affection. Now that you are home, Yufu will take good care of you. The instant her fingers touched mine, a harsh, stinging sensation rushed through my skull, sharp as cloth steeped too long in corrosive medicine. I pulled my hand back by instinct and looked at the sea-calming pearl on her head. Its luster was bright, but something dead lurked beneath the shine. Old craftsmen called such a thing a dead oyster nursing spite. It was a cheap pearl soaked in caustic solutions until it shone beyond its worth. Wear it too long and it would eat at the scalp beneath it. Does elder sister find Yufu unpleasant? Jiang Yufu's eyes reddened at once, wounded to precisely the right degree. Second girl. My father, the Marquis, whom I had never met before today, struck the rosewood table with his palm. Your sister welcomes you with kindness. Why do you recoil from her? I gave a frightened shiver, then hurriedly pulled a faded red cloth bundle from inside my cloak. Holding it above my head with both hands, I stammered, "And no, grandmother. This is my birthday gift for you." The hall fell silent for a breath. Then came the muffled laughter. "Good heavens," Princess Pingyang said, fluttering her round silk fan. "Do you suppose she has wrapped up a handful of dried turnips from the countryside?" Zhang Yufu stepped forward with a sweet, understanding smile and accepted the bundle for the dowager lady. Layer by layer, she unwrapped it. Inside lay a black, ugly stone about the size of a fist. Its surface was pitted and scarred. Nothing about it looked remarkable. "Absurd." The Marquis laughed from sheer fury and pointed at my face. "Your grandmother celebrates her 60th year, and you present her with a stone fit for wedging beneath a table leg. Did you come here to cast ill fortune upon this house?" I bowed my head until my chin nearly touched my chest. My voice trembled with tears. I found it in the stream behind the hills. In winter, if I keep it against me, it stays warm." A snort of laughter broke loose. Then the whole hall laughed louder. Zhang Yufu hid her mouth behind her hand. Though the smug light in her eyes was impossible to hide, only Xiaoheng, seated in the corner, straightened slightly. His dark gaze settled on the black stone with sudden interest. At that very moment, a ringing announcement came from beyond the doors. "An imperial edict arrives." An imperial household eunuch strode in with 2 files of palace guards. With a sweep of his horsetail whisk, he proclaimed, "In honor of the dowager lady of the Marquis of Jing'an's 60th birthday, His Majesty bestows 1 white jade platter carved with 9 dragons playing with a pearl." Every guest dropped to their knees, the brocade case opened. Resting upon red silk was a platter of translucent white jade carved with breathtaking skill. At its center sat a flawless round dragon pearl, faint light seeming to drift beneath its surface. Magnificent jade, true finest grade mutton fat jade. The Marquis beamed, his earlier anger swept away. Supported by Zhang Yufu, the dowager lady reached out eagerly to touch it. That was when I slowly raised my head, my eyes fixed on the so-called dragon pearl. A shrill, piercing chill screamed from the center of the platter, needling into my senses. Wrong, that was not the mellow, living warmth of true white jade. It was the fractured aura of a piece sealed by fire and wax. A crooked craftsman had hidden a massive break deep inside the stone by forcing specially blended wax into the cracks under great heat, sealing the ruined core beneath a perfect skin. The slightest warmth would make the wax swell, and then the entire piece would split apart. Grandmother, an imperial gift should only be touched after cleansing one's hands with warm water to show proper reverence. Eager to display her refinement before the noble houses, Zhang Yufu wrung out a warm cloth from the copper basin held by a maid and offered it to the dowager lady. Steam clung even to Yufu's own fingers. Those warm, damp hands were a heartbeat away from touching the jade platter. "Don't touch it." I snapped my head up. The timid mask vanished from my face in an instant. I lunged forward and knocked Zhang Yufu's wrist aside. Clang, the cloth fell. A few drops of warm water splashed onto the red silk, but by fortune none touched the platter. "Jang Wan, have you lost your senses?" Zhang Yufu shrieked as she fell to the floor. Tears flooded her cheeks at once. "Even if elder sister is jealous that grandmother favors me, you cannot vent your spite upon an imperial gift." "Wretched girl," the Marquis roared, his face livid. "Servants, drag this mad, unfilial creature away." The imperial eunuch's expression darkened as well. 2 stout servant women seized my shoulders from either side. I did not struggle. I only looked coldly at the eunuch and spoke every word clear, without the slightest tremor. "That pearl is ruined. Firewax sealing, warm it, and it will split. If your excellency doubts me, take that black stone you all mocked and tap the edge of the dragon pearl with it gently." At the words firewax sealing, the eunuch's face changed violently. He was a senior servant of the imperial household. Of course he knew that certain sly old craftsmen in the palace workshops sometimes used such underhanded tricks when preparing gifts sent beyond the palace walls. If a flawed counterfeit were bestowed upon a powerful noble in the emperor's name, only to crack later, The deception could doom an entire household. The eunuch who delivered it would not escape blame either. He shoved the marquise aside and stared at me for several long breaths. Then, to everyone's horror, he truly picked up my black stone and gave the priceless 9 dragons platter the lightest tap along its edge. Crack the crisp sound rang through the deathly still hall. The seemingly solid white jade dragon pearl crumbled at one side like brittle sugar. A chunk of its outer shell fell away, revealing a yellow-brown waxy filling that reeked of pine resin. Several charred cotton threads were visible inside. No one spoke. Thursday, this is a falsified tribute piece, a rejected work passed off as treasure. Cold sweat burst across the eunuch's brow. His knees nearly gave way. The Marquis and the Dowager Lady went white and collapsed back into their chairs. Had the deception gone unnoticed, and His Majesty later asked after the platter, the Marquise's household might have been condemned for sacrilege against the throne. You have saved lives today. Second young lady, you have saved lives. The eunuch turned to me. All his earlier hauteur vanished as he bowed deeply. But now every gaze in the hall left the broken imperial platter and moved to the black stone that had fallen to the floor after the strike. The impact had knocked away part of its ugly mud like crust. Beneath it shone a deep, clear green light, cool and living, like spring water in a dark chamber. Nanny Liu shrieked as though she had seen a ghost. Dowager Lady, that is no common stone, it is sea-calming green tridacna, the kind thought lost for generations. The Dowager Lady forgot every shred of dignity. She hurried forward and lifted the green treasure with trembling hands, her voice rising with excitement. This purity, the legendary grade said to warm the body and preserve vitality, I have only ever seen it listed in old palace inventories. Such a priceless treasure, and you claim you simply found it. There are plenty in the stream behind the hill, I murmured, lowering my eyes. I only kept this one because it never felt cold in winter. Once more, I wore the meek expression from before, as though the girl who had just hurled herself forward to stop Jiang Yufu had been someone else entirely. The mood inside the hall reversed in a breath. The noble woman who had mocked me moments before now stared at the green stone with such hunger they looked ready to swallow it whole. Still on her knees, Jiang Yufu's aggrieved sobbing stopped as abruptly as if an invisible hand had closed around her throat. She stared at the green glow and twisted her embroidered handkerchief until her knuckles whitened. Excellent, a low, languid voice said. A true jewel buried in dust. Xiao Heng rose. His black cloak swept across the carpet as he came toward me, each step easy and assured. He stopped before me and looked down, amusement resting in his eyes beside a sharpness that made the heart tighten. Second Miss Zhang, he said, those hands of yours possess a golden touch. At his words, father and mother seemed to awaken from a dream. Mother rushed forward and pulled me into her arms, weeping with real feeling this time. My poor child, you are the true blessing of our house. Jiang Yufu's nails dug into her palms. Then she bit down on whatever fury she felt and drifted over, wearing a fragile smile. Elder sister truly carries heaven's favor. It was Yufu who lacked the eyes to see it. Since elder sister's judgment is so wondrous, perhaps you might also examine the jewelry the storeroom issued to me 2 days ago. She raised her tear-bright eyes. Behind them lurked the malice of someone placing her last coin on one desperate throw. The stewards know I am adopted, so they often slight me. If they cheat me with false wares, that is a small grievance. But if those wares disgrace the Marquise's household, that would be far more serious. So that was her snare. If I judged wrongly, I would be exposed as a fool who had merely stumbled into one lucky guess. If I judged rightly, I would make an enemy of Steward Jang, who had controlled the household accounts and stores for more than 10 years. I lifted my head and looked at Jiang Yufu as one might look upon a painted fool capering for applause. Very well. I nodded timidly, my voice faint. Let us have a look. Delight flashed in Jiang Yufu's eyes. She immediately ordered servants to bring the pieces commissioned from Linlang Pavilion, the capital's most celebrated jewel house, one set of red gold kingfisher ornaments, one of filigree and gemstones, and one exceedingly costly hairpin of agar wood set with 3 southern pearls. Especially these 3 pearls, Zhang Yufu said, pointing to the hairpin. Steward, Zhang said. They came from century-old oysters and are worth 1,000 gold pieces. I walked closer. There was none of the deep, quiet fragrance true agar wood should carry. Instead, a cloying stench drifted from it. Like rotten timber steeped in cheap perfume, I did not even need to touch it. The wood beneath this hairpin is worm-eaten refuse, I said, pointing to the base. My voice was not loud, yet it struck the room like thunder. Molten lead was poured inside to give it weight. As for the pearls, they are genuine. Zhang Yufu let out a breath of relief and opened her mouth to sneer. I continued before she could speak. Genuine, yes, but forced. The shells were burned with strong acid. Then the pearls were sealed inside dead fish for 3 months to raise that thieving shine. They look bright enough, but soak them in old vinegar for the time it takes to drink a cup of tea, and enough of this nonsense. Steward Jang, who oversaw purchases, scrambled into the hall and dropped to his knees. My lord, my lady, second young lady has only just returned to the capital. What could she know of southern pearls? The master of Linlang Pavilion delivered these himself. How could they be false? I ignored him and turned to Xiao Heng. My lord heir, may I borrow the blade at your waist? Xiao Heng raised one brow. Then, to everyone's surprise, he drew the short dagger at his belt, a weapon famed for cutting iron, and placed it in my hand. I gripped it and brought the blade down upon the 1,000 gold agarwood hairpin without a moment's hesitation. Crackwood chips flew. Black lumps of hardened lead rolled out from the rotten core next. I ordered a bowl of aged vinegar. I dropped the 3 southern pearls inside. A sharp hiss rose from the bowl. The flawless white surfaces blackened almost at once, then softened into a foul, cloudy sludge that reeked of rot. Steward Jang collapsed to the floor like wet clay. I casually returned the dagger to Xiao Heng, then let my gaze drift toward the trembling Zhang Yufu. With one finger, I indicated the white jade pendant hanging at her waist. Steward Jang purchased false goods and lined his own purse. That alone deserves punishment. But sister, the jade pendant you are wearing is of rather fine quality. Zhang Yufu clapped a hand over it as though scalded. Grandmother gave me this. What are you trying to do? Nothing at all. I sighed softly. The jade itself is real. Unfortunately, its core has been steeped for a long time in cinnabar and a secret southern poison. The wearer will suffer no harm. But anyone who remains in the same chamber with the wearer night after night will begin to feel a racing heart, shortness of breath, and wasting weakness within half a year. Even the finest physician may be too late. Mother's face turned white as paper. Recently, out of concern for Zhang Yufu, she had spent night after night in Yufu's rooms. She had indeed begun suffering tightness in the chest and breathlessness. The imperial physician had blamed weak blood and exhaustion. The Marquise's eyes reddened with fury. He kicked Steward Jang over. Speak, who ordered you to use such filthy means against the mistress of this house. Blood stained Steward Jang's lips. His eyes moved before he could stop them. Straight toward Zhang Yufu. Her knees gave way. She dropped heavily amid the shattered remains of the counterfeit jewelry, her face ashen. The banquet she had meant as a trap for me had been torn up by the roots in less than half an hour, leaving behind the ugliest scandal this noble house had seen in years. I remained where I was, gathering my plain cloak around myself and lowering my head like a startled rabbit. Not far away, Xiao Heng rubbed one long finger along the hilt of his dagger. The way he looked at me was the way a warrior might regard a peerless blade just drawn from years of dust. The winds over the capital may be changing, he murmured with a quiet laugh. After the poison pendant affair, Steward Jang was bound that very night and delivered to the Court of Judicial Review. Mother fell seriously ill. When she woke, the old tenderness in her eyes whenever she looked at Zhang Yufu was gone, replaced by lingering fear. To preserve the household's reputation, Father did not cast Yufu out at once. Instead, he confined her to Langshan Court, and I, quite naturally, was given charge of the Marquise's private treasury. Half a month later, the capital's most prestigious gathering, the Gathering of True Discernment, was held at the Grand Princess's country residence. It was called an elegant gathering, but beneath the music and silk lay a battlefield without swords, where the great houses measured one another's wealth, taste, and hidden strength. To avoid whispers that the Marquise's family mistreated its adopted daughter, Mother reluctantly allowed Jiang Yufu to attend behind me. Before we left, Yufu changed into a restrained moon-white gown. Her eyes were faintly red, lending her an even more delicate air. She followed close behind and lowered her voice. Elder sister, nearly every important name in the capital will be there today. You must be careful what you say. The treasures displayed at the gathering are rare beyond price. If you pretend to knowledge you do not possess, it is our whole family that will lose face. I lowered my eyes. On the tip of her embroidered shoe clung a nearly invisible dusting of white powder sulfur. A cold trace of a smile touched my lips. Half a month in confinement, and this woman was still scheming against me. The Grand Princess's residence overflowed with rare objects, but the day's greatest attraction stood in the central waterside pavilion, a blind choosing of uncut stones. More than a dozen old mineral boulders had been brought from deep pits in the western regions and half covered with red silk. The nobles present could rely only upon experience and sight. One cut could beggar a man, another could make his fortune. Well, is this the second Miss Jang of the Marquis of Jingan's house, the one who can judge truth from falsehood with a single touch? Princess Pingyang approached, fanning herself with a smile sharpened by mockery. She had always been friendly with Jiang Yufu. Clearly she had come prepared. They say heaven placed true discernment in second Miss Jiang's palm. The Grand Princess happens to have several dead stones here today. Why not grant us a demonstration and open our eyes? The crowd gathered at once. Behind a curtain of pearls, the Grand Princess sat without comment, clearly interested in testing me as well. Outside the curtain, Xiao Heng lounged in a carved armchair, turning a white jade cup between his fingers. His gaze passed through the crowd and found me without error. Jiang Yufu tugged at my sleeve, pretending to be anxious. Princess, please do not tease her. My elder sister grew up far from the capital. What could she know of choosing rough stone? You will frighten her to tears. Then she leaned to my ear, lowering her voice until only I could hear. Elder sister, if you refuse, people will say the Marquise's family staged all your earlier feats. Choose the greenskin stone in the middle. It is certain to hold fine jade. Pressed from every side, I allowed myself to be guided toward the stone table. 3 enormous boulders stood there, their surfaces covered in thick brown weathered crust from long years underground. My hand trembled as I reached forward. First, my fingers hovered over the greenskin stone Jiang Yufu had urged me to choose. The instant I touched it, a vicious heat stabbed along my fingertips and into my veins. There was no treasure within. It was a hollowed waste stone, packed again with strong acid, poor jade powder, sulfur, and saltpeter. The moment a stonecutter saw bit into it, friction would set the mixture off. I, standing nearest, would be maimed or killed. The Grand Princess herself might be injured as well. A fine borrowed blade indeed. I withdrew my hand without expression. My fingers moved past the trap and finally settled on the shortest, ugliest stone of the lot, its surface webbed with dry gray cracks. It looked so worthless that no one had even spared a corner of red silk to place beneath it. But the instant my fingertips pressed against its shell, my heart stumbled. No coldness, no dead aura instead. There was the faintest pulse, steady and soft, like the heartbeat of some sleeping creature. Beneath the stone crust seemed to rest a spirit that had slumbered for 1,000 years. Pure vitality flowed from it into my fingers and through my limbs until I nearly sighed aloud. I want this one, I said, pointing to the cracked stone. My voice was quiet but perfectly clear. For one breath, no one spoke. Then the pavilion erupted in laughter. Second Miss Jiang, are you truly blind? Princess Pingyang laughed so hard her fan shook in her hand. That stone is cracked from end to end. Whatever moisture it once held fled long ago. You may as well search a refuse heap for a crown jewel. Jiang Yufu stared at me, startled. Then delight flooded her eyes. With a generous sigh, she said, "If elder sister insists upon choosing that piece of refuse, then let it be cut." The stonecutter stepped forward, glanced toward the grand princess behind the pearl curtain, and after receiving her nod, brought his blade down. The first cut produced nothing but dull gray powder. "Ha! Dead stone after all," someone scoffed. The cutter shook his head and prepared to split the whole thing straight through the center. "Wait." I raised 2 fingers from my sleeve and traced a line through the air. "Follow the crack on the left, 3 inches downward at a slant. Shave the edge. Do not touch the center." The cutter hesitated, then changed to a finer saw. Following my direction, he opened a narrow cut with great care. The instant a ladle of clear water struck the opening, a low hum seemed to fill the pavilion. Red light blazed forth in broad daylight, deep and brilliant as a dying sun across a battlefield. The stone was not merely translucent. Golden fire seemed suspended within the crimson, as though dragon's blood truly coursed through the heart of the rock. Clang! The cutter's blade fell from his hand. He trembled from head to foot and dropped to his knees. "Thursday, this is crimson dragon crystal, and a living vein at that, a treasure not seen in 1,000 years." The gathering went silent in shock. The noble woman who had laughed moments before looked as though their voices had been stolen. Their eyes nearly bulged from their faces. The grand princess swept aside the pearl curtain and descended the steps herself. She stared at the crimson crystal, then at me, astonishment and fierce delight blazing in her eyes. What a daughter the Jang house has recovered. This stone lay in the imperial workshop's refuse store for 3 years. Master after master declared it dead, yet you saw through it at once. I lowered my head and twisted the edge of my sleeve between my fingers. "I only saw that it was cracked," I murmured timidly. "I thought perhaps it was hurting." The excuse was absurd, yet beside a gift that could turn dead stone into treasure, absurdity itself began to sound like hidden wisdom. Zhang Yufu's face shifted from white to green. Her body swayed. She could not understand how the death trap she had built so carefully had become the very stepping stone that raised my name across the capital. "Since second Miss Zhang's fortune is so extraordinary," Xiaoheng said at last, rising from his seat, "this heir finds himself curious. What exactly lies inside that green-skinned stone your sister was so eager for you to choose?" He did not call for the stonecutter instead. He drew the sword at his waist. His wrist turned once, a cold arc of steel flashed, and the stone Zhang Yufu had urged upon me split cleanly from the side. Bang, it did not burst, only because Xiaoheng's sword had moved too swiftly to create the needed friction. But the moment the stone opened, the pavilion filled with the sickening reek of sulfur and smoke. Everyone stumbled backward, hands over their noses. The center of the boulder had been completely hollowed out. Hidden inside was a sinister wooden doll marked with a person's birth characters, surrounded by saltpeter, sulfur, and poor jade powder packed together as an incendiary charge. Xiaoheng slid his sword back into its sheath. A cursed effigy and a hidden fire charge at the grand princess's gathering. His voice turned colder than winter iron. "Who gave you the audacity?" His gaze struck Princess Ping Yang and Zhang Yufu like a blade. Princess Ping Yang dropped to her knees at once, too frightened to form a proper sentence. Zhang Yufu collapsed beside her, shaking so violently that her teeth chattered. She knew it well. After today, her name among the noble daughters of the capital was ruined beyond repair. I stood quietly behind Xiaoheng's tall figure and watched the farce unravel. Then, unseen by everyone else, I drew back the hand that had guided the whole board from the beginning. 3 days after my triumph at the gathering of true discernment, the Grand Princess sent the crimson dragon crystal to the Marquise's residence. When the red silk was lifted, everyone in the courtyard forgot to breathe. The Dowager Lady no longer looked at me as merely a promising granddaughter. She looked at me as if a living bodhisattva had stepped into her house. "Second girl, come with me." She dismissed the servants and took my hand. For the first time, her palm was damp with sweat. She led me through layer after layer of corridors, then up toward an abandoned ancestral compound at the rear of the estate, a place no one had entered in years. Moss crawled across the doors. The whole place carried a hard, iron-cold air, like an old battlefield sealed beneath stone. Father was already waiting there. In his hand he gripped a long black key of dark iron, strange in shape. His brow was knotted tight. "Your grandfather died young," the dowager lady said quietly. "Before his death, he left behind this secret treasury. The lock was made by a master of mechanisms from the former dynasty. It contains 9 turning wheels. Force it open or turn even one wheel wrongly, and hidden crossbows inside will reduce everything in the vault to splinters." Her voice carried equal parts helplessness and hope. "For more than 10 years, this house has summoned every skilled artisan we could find. Not one has opened it." She fixed her gaze on me. "You can hear a stone's heartbeat. Can you hear what this door is saying?" To anyone else, the question would have sounded ridiculous. I did not laugh. The moment I neared the heavy iron-bound Nanmu door, I felt something fierce radiating from it, keen as drawn steel and cavalry horns. There was none of the vulgar glitter of treasure in that lock, only killing intent and loyalty. I raised my hand and touched the rim of the keyhole with one fingertip. Cold, utterly cold. I closed my eyes and sharpened my senses until the world beyond my hand seemed to fade. Deep inside the lock, I heard the faintest metallic bite of 9 gears worn by time. The sound was so slight it was almost no sound at all. It felt like my grandfather's last will left behind in iron, a warning against unworthy descendants, waiting for the one who truly carried his blood and resolve. "First wheel, 3 inches to the left," I said softly. Father looked as though he were facing an army. He turned the key with exquisite care click. The mechanism caught second wheel to the right back half a turn. Instruction after instruction left my lips, calm and measured. Veins stood out on Father's forehead. Sweat ran down his temples. When the final wheel fell into place, the massive iron door gave a groan like some ancient beast waking from sleep. Slowly it withdrew. No storm of hidden bolts flew from the darkness. No heaps of gold or silver greeted us. At the very center of the vault stood only an old sword case beneath a thick veil of cobwebs. It opened. The dowager lady trembled. It truly opened. We had just begun to step inside when hurried footsteps sounded behind us. "You cannot go in, grandmother." "Father, that place is a death summons." I turned. Jang Yufu stood there. Though she was supposed to be confined, her hair hung loose, her face was white as a corpse's, and in one hand she clutched a yellowed letter. Several officers from the capital prefecture stood behind her, stern and armed. "Yufu, have you gone mad?" Father roared. "Who allowed you to bring outsiders into the forbidden ground of our ancestral shrine?" Jang Yufu gave a wild, broken laugh. She pointed at me, hatred twisting her face. "She drove me to this. She stole everything from me. If I must fall, then I will drag the whole marquise's house down beside me." She thrust the yellowed letter high above her head. "My lord, this is the evidence I found days ago in a hidden compartment of the study. The late marquis secretly kept tokens belonging to rebels of the former faction and plotted treason. This private vault contains their dragon robes and their list of conspirators." The officers drew their blades at once. Treason could condemn 9 degrees of Kinfather's legs weakened, and he dropped heavily to the ground. I looked at Jang Yufu in silence. Jealousy had eaten the last of her sense. She had become so desperate that she was willing to burn the whole house simply to scorch me with it. "You claim that sword case contains a rebel register." I did not retreat. I strode into the vault and laid my hand directly on the dusty case. "Does it not?" Jang Yufu screamed. Feverish triumph shone in her eyes. "Open it then. Let everyone see." "Very well." I pressed the hidden catch. Boom! A blade of cold radiance burst from the case, bright enough to seem capable of splitting the heavens. The air in the vault dropped to winter in a heartbeat. There was no dragon robe from a fallen dynasty inside. There was a sword. Its blade shone white as frost, and 2 ancient characters were engraved along the steel guardian of the realm. More than 10 years had passed, yet not a speck of rust marred it. Its edge still looked hungry, and beside it lay a tiger tally with one corner missing. It was a military command token lost for years by the Great Yuan court, the kind bestowed only upon generals whose victories had preserved the realm itself. Thursday, the guardian's sword. The officer in command went ashen. He dropped to his knees and struck his forehead to the floor. This lowly servant was blind. I have offended the honored spirit of the late Marquis, guardian of the realm. Father's mouth fell open. The dowager lady burst into tears and sank to her knees. Old Marquis, you left the Jang family the greatest shield our descendants could ever possess. I turned and looked down at the frozen Zhang Yufu. Me fingertip brushed lightly across the sword's edge. The blade answered with a clear ringing note, almost like a dragon's cry. Grandfather's sword recognizes the blood of the Jang house, I said. It has no patience for filthy tricks. I walked to Zhang Yufu and plucked the forged letter from her hand. I rubbed the paper once between my fingers. The ink carries pine soot mixed with huizhou grass ash that only entered the capital half a month ago. Your attempt to age the paper is crude. Sister, if you wished to stage the downfall of an entire clan, you should have chosen a better prop. Zhang Yufu stared at the guardian's sword blazing with the glory of an old defender of the realm. Rage and shock overwhelmed her. Blood rose to her lips, and she collapsed unconscious. She had plotted so carefully to drag the Marquise's house into ruin. Instead, the vault I opened revealed an inheritance powerful enough to protect the Zhang name for generations. With the guardian sword returned to the light, the standing of the Marquis of Jing'an's house rose higher than it had ever stood before. Keeping a tiger tally in private was a dangerous offense, but His Majesty remembered how the late Marquis had once saved the throne in battle. Rather than punish the family, the Emperor formally bestowed the tally upon the Zhang house anew, and ordered it enshrined in the ancestral temple as a token of imperial pardon and favor. As for Zhang Yufu, forging evidence of treason crossed a boundary no family pride could excuse. This time, even mother turned cold toward her. That very night, Yufu was placed in a shabby carriage and sent to the harshest labor estate outside the capital, far from the inner household and its privileges. From that day forward, the Marquise's family treated her as one already cast from its doors. The way the household looked at me changed completely. Contempt became awe. Once forgotten little courtyard filled until there was scarcely room to walk between the rare treasures people sent me. Yet, great fortune often arrives with a winter wind behind it. Half a month later, a crisis capable of shaking the foundations of the realm slipped quietly into the capital. A foreign delegation came bearing tribute. An enormous bronze cauldron they claimed had survived from ancient times. The envoy swore that the vessel could seize the hidden virtues of heaven and earth and refine elixirs that lengthened life. His Majesty was delighted. A banquet was ordered in the palace, and the ancient cauldron was used before the court to refine a pill. That very night, the Emperor swallowed the first pill drawn from it. Less than half an hour later, his heart began to race. Dark blood stained his lips, and he fell unconscious. The imperial physicians could find no remedy. The foreign envoy, instead of showing fear, turned the accusation back upon the great Yuan court. He declared before the throne, "This cauldron is a divine relic of antiquity. Only a true son of heaven can endure its sacred force. If the Emperor of Great Yuan cannot bear it, then heaven itself has judged him unworthy." The words sent shock through court and capital alike. Worse whispers began to spread that the Zhang family's opening of its secret vault had released the guardian sword's killing aura, offending the divine cauldron and bringing calamity upon the Emperor. "Wanner, His Majesty summons you to the palace at once." Father rushed into my courtyard with his official hat crooked on his head and his whole body trembling, to enter the palace. Now, before a hostile envoy and an ailing emperor was 1,000 times more dangerous than exposing false jade at the Grand Princess's gathering. If I succeeded, people would call it my duty. If I failed, I could be charged with deceiving the throne and harming the emperor. The whole house might fall with me. I was seated by the window trimming a winter plum. At Father's words, I simply set down the shears and slipped my grandfather's old thumb ring onto my hand. "Father, do not panic. Have the carriage prepared." My voice was so calm that even I found it strange. I had grown weary of wearing the timid mask. If heaven had given me hands that could hear the breath of all things, Then I meant to discover just how many ghosts and demons in this world were hiding beneath painted faces. The Hall of Supreme Harmony was thick with dragon incense and bitter medicine. Civil and military officials knelt in rows, not one daring to breathe too loudly. Xiao Heng stood beside the imperial couch in a black python robe embroidered with a four-clawed golden dragon, a long saber at his waist. He looked like a war god carved from night, his cold gaze fixed upon the arrogant envoy in the center of the hall. Second miss of the Marquis of Jing'an's house, Jang Wan enters the imperial presence. At the eunuch's trembling call, I walked into the hall in plain robes, my steps steady. The envoy gave a contemptuous laugh and looked me over. Has Great Yuan, no learned men left. You send an untried girl to judge an ancient divine vessel. Ms. Jiang, this cauldron carries the blessing of the gods. A mortal who lays an unworthy hand upon it may call heaven's wrath upon herself. Xiao Heng's gaze came to me. For the briefest instant, concern flickered in those dark, unreadable eyes. His fingers tightened slightly around the hilt of his saber. Second Miss Jiang, he said, his voice cool and clear. This cauldron is strange. The imperial physician's silver needles reveal no poison. If you are uncertain, you may still withdraw. He was giving me a path to safety. If I fainted, pleaded weakness, or admitted fear, he could remove me from the matter without disgrace. I did not take it. I met his eyes and gave the smallest nod. Then before the watching court, I walked straight toward the vast green bronze cauldron covered in intricate patterns. It did carry the weight of great age, but as I drew near, the faintest foul scent reached me. I lifted my right hand until my fingertips hovered an inch from the bronze, no spiritual breath known. There was none of the vast, solemn presence an ancient sacred vessel ought to possess. Instead, I sensed something damp and cold, an oily herbal reek like grave moss steeped in poison. The scent was so faint that the heavy palace incense and medicinal smoke easily concealed it from ordinary noses. To my senses, however, it hung before me like a black miasma too thick to disperse. Without hesitation, I pressed my whole palm against the cauldron. Insolence! The envoy shouted, "You dare profane a divine relic!" I ignored him. The touch beneath my fingers was not the simple cold heaviness of bronze. There was something else, a minute resistance, the faint bite of hidden mechanisms meeting one another inside the walls. This cauldron is no divine relic from antiquity, I said, withdrawing my hand. My voice carried cleanly through the hall. Lies, the envoy struck the table and sprang to his feet. Empty accusations, this is a treasure of my kingdom. You will not slander it without proof. I turned toward Xiao Heng and the anxious Empress Dowager behind the screen near the imperial couch. Then I spoke one word at a time. This cauldron hides another chamber within its walls. The court erupted in shocked murmurs. I pointed to the ring of intricate kui dragon patterns around the bronze. The walls are hollow and double-layered. The inner chamber has been coated with a powerful hallucinogenic poison called nether incense. Once fire is lit beneath the cauldron, the metal heats. The poison trapped inside the hollow walls seeps out with the rising vapor and enters whatever medicine is being refined. I raised my voice. His Majesty swallowed no elixir. He swallowed poison drawn out by flame. Slander, utter nonsense. The envoy's face changed, though he tried to hold himself proud. You say the walls are double, and we are simply to believe you. Unless someone cleaves the cauldron apart with a weapon, who can prove such a thing? Yet this is a sacred relic. Who among you dares destroy it? He was certain Great Yuan would not risk smashing a priceless tribute from a neighboring realm. There is no need to cleave it. I smiled coldly, and let my gaze pass over the 3 beast-shaped feet beneath the cauldron. To my senses, one of those feet was a fraction thicker than the other 2. The difference was almost nothing, but it was there. A seam where the mechanism joined. I walked over in the silence of the entire hall. I braced my grandfather's rough thumb ring against that tiny irregularity. I felt the mechanism resist beneath my pressure. I held my breath. Then I shoved inward and twisted sharply to the right click. Then came a long grating groan of metal. Before the horrified court, the seemingly indestructible cauldron began to open along the ring of Kui dragon carvings. A narrow seam appeared down its middle. No blade had struck it. The hidden mechanism had simply answered the proper pressure and released itself. As the seam widened, a thick rotten stench rolled across the hall. Through the opening, everyone could plainly see blackened cakes of poison plastered throughout the hollow inner chamber. "That is nether incense from the southern borderlands," cried the chief imperial physician. "When heated, the poison turns to vapor. For a short while, it makes the victim unnaturally alert, but within half an hour, it numbs the heart meridians and can kill." The proof stood before everyone. The envoy's flushed face drained to gray, his legs gave way, and he collapsed like mud. "Seize him." Xiao Heng drew his saber in one clean motion and set the bright edge against the envoy's throat. "You came under the banner of tribute while plotting against the throne. Confine the entire delegation and question them under guard. Not one leaves the palace." At that moment, a eunuch's joyous cry rang from the imperial couch. "His Majesty is awake. Empress Dowager, His Majesty has awakened. The physicians used the needles and forced out the poison. He is conscious again." The tension in the hall broke at once. Officials bowed their heads in relief, some openly weeping. I stood beside the open bronze cauldron and finally released a long breath. Fine sweat covered my brow. Tracing and opening that mechanism had nearly exhausted every thread of my concentration. Xiao Heng kicked the envoy toward the palace guards and strode to me. He looked at my pale face, then suddenly pulled the black cloak from his shoulders and wrapped it around me without asking. "Jang Wan," he said, bending slightly. "With one touch today, you stripped the mask from a foreign court's ambition and bought great Yuan years of peace." Warm breath brushed my ear. His voice held open admiration, and beneath it a gentleness he himself did not seem to notice. I gathered the cloak closer. It still carried his crisp, wintry scent, out of habit. I lowered my eyes and tried to summon my old timid manner. It was grandfather's spirit protecting us. "Ina of the act," Xiao Heng laughed softly. "Ordinary timid girls do not unravel plots between kingdoms, nor do they open mechanisms no court craftsman can solve." I looked up and met his eyes. They were deep and still as a winter pool, but for the first time, there was no scrutiny in them, only equal respect, and something quieter, more possessive, gathering beneath it. I knew then that the sharpest blade in the capital had become the strongest shield at my back. After the palace crisis passed, imperial favor descended in full measure. An edict arrived directly at the Marquis of Jing'an's residence, granting me the noble rank of Lady Lingxi of the second court grade rare treasures. And gifts flowed through the gates in an endless procession. His Majesty even permitted me an honorary post at the imperial workshops, where I was to examine the troublesome tribute objects that arrived from across the realm. After that, the Marquise's gates were scarcely ever quiet, calling cards from nobles seeking my eye for treasures piled high as a hill. I refused them all. I still preferred my small courtyard, trimming flowers, tending winter branches, and running my fingers over old objects that had honest stories to tell. Father and mother, meanwhile, had moved from contempt to something close to careful courtship. Every prosperous shop in the capital that grandfather had left behind was transferred into my name. "From now on, no one in this capital will dare slight you again," mother said as she personally settled a bright red fox fur cloak around my shoulders. Her eyes were damp. "You are the anchor of this household." I accepted the late arriving affection calmly. Blood alone had not taught them to value me. Strength had. It was not a tender truth, but it was a true one, and I had no quarrel with reality. By deep winter, snow buried the capital beneath white silence. The brazier burned hot in my warm chamber. Xiao Heng, who had arrived without invitation, stood at the window as though he had every right to be there. He turned and placed a small white jade pendant in my palm. The stone was smooth, luminous, and without a flaw. "I had a senior monk outside the city bless it," he said. There was an uncommon softness around his eyes. "It is said to nourish warmth and vitality. Keep it near you." The instant my fingertips touched the pendant, I felt something unlike the chill of an ordinary dead object. A steady warmth answered me. Firm, quiet. Almost as though the jade had found something in me that matched itself. Thank you, my lord. I closed my fingers around the pendant, and before I could stop it, a bright smile curved across my lips. The splendor of the capital, its hidden knives, its treacherous currents, its glittering temptations, I had learned to see them all clearly, and with these hands I had learned to hold my ground among them. From that day forward, there was no longer a Jang Wan lost beyond the family gates, a girl anyone could dismiss or despise. There was only Lady Lingxi, who could judge truth from falsehood with one touch and settle a hall with a single word. And that is where Jang Wan's story leaves us. I think what stayed with me most was not the priceless jade, the crimson dragon crystal, or even the imperial title she eventually received. It was one simple truth near the end. Her family did not learn to value her because blood suddenly became stronger. They learned to value her because she became impossible to ignore. That is not a particularly gentle truth, but sometimes the truths that help us grow are not gentle. When Jang Wan first returned home, she was their lost daughter in name, but in their hearts she was still an outsider. Her clothes were plain, her manners seemed rustic. She had none of the polish Zhang Yufu had spent years building inside that household. So everyone made a judgment before they knew anything about her. And that is probably the first thing I want to talk about. People are very quick to confuse appearance with worth. The expensive pearl must be precious. The ugly stone must be worthless. The beautifully dressed daughter must be refined. The quiet girl from outside the capital must be ignorant. Yet again and again this story turns those assumptions upside down. The imperial treasure hides rotten wax. The worthless stone hides something priceless. The elegant jewelry carries poison. The ugly cracked boulder contains a treasure no master could recognize. And the timid girl everyone looks down upon turns out to be the one person capable of seeing what everyone else has missed. That pattern is not accidental. Because Jang Wan's gift is not really just about touching objects and knowing whether they are genuine. It is about discernment. She can see through appearances, and slowly she learns to do the same with people. She sees Zhang Yufu's sweetness and recognizes the calculation beneath it. She sees her parents' sudden affection and understands why it has appeared. She sees Xiao Heng's protection and recognizes something very different there, respect. That difference matters. Affection that arrives only after you become useful may still feel warm. But respect is something else entirely. Xiao Heng does not admire Jang Wan because she becomes obedient, beautiful, or easy to protect. He admires her because she is capable, because she stays calm when everyone else panics, because she can stand in a hall full of powerful people and still trust what she knows. And maybe that is why the jade pendant at the end feels so meaningful to me. For once, Jang Wan touches something and feels no hidden corruption, no poison, no false surface, only warmth. Quiet, steady, almost as if, after spending the entire story separating truth from deception, she has finally found something that does not need to be tested. But there is another part of this ending that I really love. Jang Wan does not become obsessed with proving herself after she succeeds. She refuses the endless invitations. She does not spend her days chasing applause from the same society that once mocked her. She goes back to her quiet courtyard. She tends her flowers, she touches old things with honest stories. That may be the strongest choice she makes in the entire story. Because winning is not always about making everyone regret underestimating you. Sometimes winning means reaching a point where their opinion no longer controls your peace. So if there is one thing I hope you carry away from Jang Wan's story, it is this. Do not rush to prove your worth to people who have already decided not to see it. Keep learning, keep sharpening. What is yours? Learn to recognize what is real, not only in objects, but in affection, loyalty, promises, and people. And when you finally become strong enough to stand on your own ground, remember this too. Not everything that glitters deserves your hand. And not everything rough and ordinary should be thrown away. Sometimes the thing everyone dismisses is the very thing carrying the rarest light. Now I want to know what you think if you were Jang Wan. After everything her family did, Would you have accepted their late affection as calmly as she did, or would you have kept your distance forever?